So we're going to jump into yet again another Transformer Slag podcast Patreon listener question. This is going to be the second one this week now, and it's a really good one too. If you want to be part of the Transformer Slag podcast Patreon, help support the podcast and let us know we're doing a half-decent job here in the Transformer world, keeping you up to date on the news and educating you on everything that's going on. Again, patreon.com/protoman, or check the pinned comment or the description below. What does it get you? It gets your name in the end credit scroll. It gets you access to the exclusive Discord, and depending on what tier, you might get something in the mail, or you just might get a chance to submit a Patreon listener question depending on your tier. And we got a great one here from Jeff, and Jeff wants to know, got a Patreon listener question for you, Proto, on the backs of the G.I. Joe Transformer crossover reveal, knocking out a very easy answer for us to put out here. What is the biggest missed opportunity in Transformers history in terms of either toys or marketing? Things like Arcee not getting a figure in the 20 plus years initially, or Optimus Prime getting a hobbled design of his original intent from his Power Master, etc., etc. Thanks for what you do, Jeff. Well, thank you, Jeff, for an awesome Patreon listener question. Now, I could tackle this from two standpoints. There's missed opportunities by what the fans would perceive, and then, of course, the business side of it. Because I'll be honest with you, while as a fan, it would have been great to get an Arcee toy back in the day, maybe even that old Arcee prototype with that obscure kind of shape and design would have been kind of cool. But the business side of it would have said otherwise. Probably would have not sold well in the boys market. You know, there was market research that Hasbro had just from the G.I. Joe side of things and seeing how those Scarlet toys were not moving, and how like the Wolverine, which was a vehicle that had CoverGirl with G.I. Joe, was not selling well. They had that research from 82, 83, 84 already from their other boys' toys brands and how that didn't work out. So I guess they just didn't want to roll the dice. Not to mention it was already 1986. Transformers was kind of on its way down. It was kind of a sketchy time. As for like even something like Unicron, was it a missed opportunity? It would have been cool to get that fat, round prototype Unicron, but would it have done well? Who knows? It would have been a big, expensive product. I think it probably would have done well as, say, Fortress Maximus did back then, and probably would have ended up being a big, expensive, hard-to-get item in the modern market today, much like a Fort Max. But I always felt, and this is just me personally, but it's a combination of it would have been great for the fans, it would have been great for business, and I think it would have been great for the time. And it's something that's not really a toy, but it's not really marketing. It's kind of a fusion between the two, but more so it's video games. And what I mean by that is Transformers found its success way too early during the beginning of the video game golden age, and didn't really find its success again until much later, but didn't really find good footing. And I'll explain what I mean. So we all know Transformers found its prime success during Generation 1 between 1984 and 1986. Of course, it went on for 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, but it really was those first 3 years where it found its most market success. Unfortunately, during those times, there wasn't a good Western platform for those products to be represented in video games. Yes, there was a Commodore 64 Transformers game and a Sinclair Spectrum version. I did a panel at TFCon talking about all those, wishy-washy kind of games. And of course, the David Crane Battle to Save Earth Transformers game, also by the Commodore 64. And then you go, well, Proto, I mean, there was Nintendo games in Japan. Yeah, there was. There was the Mystery of Convoy or Convoy no Nazo game in 1986. And then there was the Headmasters one for the Famicom Disk System in 1987. The problem is with all those I just mentioned, they happened between 85 and 87. Two of them on obscure systems that didn't really have a good, I guess we could call it, staple in the Western market, not to mention they're terrible games. And the other two, again, Japanese exclusives, 1986, 1987. The problem is that I look at the success that Ninja Turtles had. Ninja Turtles really started their momentum in 1987 and then kind of peaked around 1993, and then Power Rangers kind of took the torch from there. But between 1987 and 1992, Ninja Turtles owned the world. And during that time, coincidentally, in 1987 to about 1992, was the exact same golden era of the Nintendo Entertainment System in the West. Now, what am I getting at with all of this? Well, again, the Nintendo Entertainment System came out in Japan as the Famicom in 1983, came out in the West in 1987, but in the West, it didn't really get its momentum until, 1985 it came out in the West, but it didn't get its momentum until 1987, and then it really started to pick up interest. The demand was getting met for the market, and before you knew it, by 1988, according to statistics, 1 out of every 3 households had a Nintendo in it. And then, of course, Ninja Turtles happens, becomes this huge thing, and just this perfect, symbiosis of Ninja Turtles is huge, the Nintendo is in every household, and then you get these legendary Nintendo games with the Ninja Turtle brand moving forward, and it just worked out perfectly. Imagine during that 1987 to 1991 bubble, instead of it, being Ninja Turtles, there was a Transformer game. Now you could say, oh, well, Transformers was dead at that point. There wasn't really any cartoons happening. Yeah, sure, there was the 1987 Rebirth 3 episodes, season 4. And then, of course, and I use air quotes here, season 5, 1988 Tommy Kennedy episodes. Still kind of keeping Transformers alive on the TV screens, but not really. But I feel that there could have been an opportunity in all of that, where Hasbro at the time could have put out something to keep the brand alive. G.I. Joe was still finding success in the toy aisles. And despite the fact that it had a weaker cartoon through Deke and everything, they still put out 2 G.I. Joe games for the Nintendo, and one of them is actually very good, actually, the G.I. Joe Nintendo game, the original. And they made an incredible arcade game that was based off the Deke cartoon, but that's a whole other story. The point is that Transformers, when you really look at its history with video games, after that 1987 Famicom Disk System Headmasters game, Transformers would have a black hole of no video games between 1987 and 1997. 10 years of nothing. Completely skipping over a majority of the success of the Nintendo in the West, skipping over completely the success of the Super Nintendo in the West, and of course, just getting in there when the N64 and the PlayStation started really getting momentum in the West. That being said, there was nothing in between it. Yeah, there was a Tiger Electronics G2 game that no one owns. We're not going to talk about Tiger Electronics. We're going to talk about video games. Let's be real here. The glorified calculators. Let's be real. And I'm a guy who collects that stuff and the Game & Watch, but let's be real here. But I feel that, if you look at what was happening, give you an example, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game for the regular Nintendo, the regular SNES, Nintendo Entertainment System, huge blockbuster game, tons of sales, was super successful. That was in 1990. Why don't you take the Transformers line that was happening in 1990 during those peak success, peak sales and everything for the Nintendo, and what was available in 1990? Yeah, you had the Micro Masters and stuff like that, but you also had the Action Masters. Action Masters were all these toys that are based on throwback designs of Generation 1, 84, 85 characters. Wouldn't it be great to make a Transformers Transformers video game that could still have kind of a reflection on the 84, 85 toy stuff, characters and everything like that? You could still have the cartoons running in reruns on television, and the Action Master product could be a reflection of those characters available. And of course, there was also the Transformers Classics line, not to be confused with the 2006 version, but the gold packaging Generation 1, we'll call them the first form of reissues back in the day, also kicking around too. That could have been found out at market in the West and been done predominantly. There's a lot of ways I would have gone about it. I'm just saying that the missed opportunity, in my opinion, is not having a Transformers video game in the Western market during the peak of the Nintendo Entertainment System's takeover of the living rooms of America and Canada. It's something that I feel like such a missed opportunity, because I think that the video game would have been a advertising tool for literally everything else that was going on the toy shelves at the same time that didn't have, it had a comic book that was kicking around, by Marvel, but it really didn't have any kind of decent show. And I think a video game, which is what kids were really focusing on in that new era, and all the other major brands were taking advantage of it. G.I. Joe had it. Look, there was a Barbie Nintendo game. Man, even Thunderbirds, Jerry Anderson's Super Mario Nation from the 1960s had a Nintendo game. You know, the old show that was being played in reruns in the 90s had a Nintendo game. Bucky O'Hare had a Nintendo game. Like almost every other toy brand had one, but Transformers didn't. Yes, again, Famicom, Mystery of Convoy. I'm not talking about the Japanese market and an extremely hard and badly designed game from Takara Internal. I'm talking about the Western market and keeping that Western market alive. Japan would keep going with Transformers, you know, nonstop through all the 80s and the early 90s. But it wasn't so much the case here. So I think that that's the biggest missed opportunity, because a game, if done correctly, would have been a good marketing tool. Kids would have picked up that game, or even more so, the strong rental market that existed during that era. And that would have been an advertising tool to then get people to then be interested in the product. I remember an interview many years ago with Kevin Nash and 123 Kid, aka X-Pac, two wrestlers from the WWF and WWE. And they talked about how they saw how the video game market was a big part of introducing people into wrestling and knowing those characters much more intimately in a weekend than what a hour show on a Saturday could have done. Someone could rent, you know, Super Nintendo's WWF Royal Rumble or Raw and get very well known, you know, the characters, their bios, play with those characters over the weekend, then become interested in wrestling just because of the product, even though they never consumed it, the actual product itself, let alone the action figures, the posters, the magazines. So it's the same thing. I see that kind of market connection there. And I've always felt that that was the biggest missed opportunity for Transformers, is not having a proper, well-made game in the West. Look at all the amazing Disney afternoon, you know, Disney games of DuckTales and Darkwing Duck, and Tailspin one's kind of meh, but Rescue Rangers was pretty good too. You know, those were all done by Capcom. Imagine if Hasbro or Takara would have went to Capcom and say, hey, make us a Transformer game. You make already a really good super fighting robot Mega Man game. Make us a Transformer game. I think it would have been fantastic, and I think we would have been talking about it for years to come. But the sad truth is between 1987 and 1997, there was nothing. 10 years of darkness. And then what came out in 97? Well, we got the Beast Wars PlayStation 1 and PC game, which is utterly terrible. It would end up being followed up by the Beast Wars Transmetals game, which is slightly better. But man, that Beast Wars game for PlayStation 1. So that wasn't any better when we finally made our grand Western return in Transformers video game properties. But let me know what you think. What do you think was a missed opportunity that would have made sense back then, that would have really helped the brand? I mean, there was talks all the time of doing stuff with Transformers in video games. I know that Argonaut Studios, the people that were behind Star Fox and everything, during the G2 era, when G2 was going to be a big push, and of course we got that G2 Tiger Electronics game was part of that big push, there was talks of doing a G2 game for the Super Nintendo. Ended up, nothing ever came of it, and then the 1994 software and development of it ended up getting put into another game, rumored, was a game called Vortex that came out for the Super Nintendo, which had a transforming robot. And, you know, there's all these rumors. Nothing has ever been confirmed. You'd have to talk to Miyamoto's son-in-law to learn the truth about that. But that's a whole other story. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think. Again, a very interesting question that is profound and leads to a lot of debate. But I've always felt that the absence of a strong video game market for Transformers during that video game boom of 1987 to 1991 would have really helped the brand survive during that era when Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers was just ruling the world for a good, I'd have to say, almost 10 years at that point. It would take a Michael Bay movie and a Beast Wars Season 2 to really get people's attention again. So it really shows how sometimes those things work. But let me know what you think. And again, if you want to be like Jeff and be a patron, help support the podcast and let us know what you think. Let us know if you like what we do, or just help us, you know, keep this podcast going with your awesome dollars. Again, patreon.com/protoman, or check the pinned comment or description below. And rock out.